All right, you guys ready?
Yep, sure.
All right. At the close of the American War of Independence in 1783, the Continental Army was at a low point for morale. The civilian governing body of the Army, the Continental Congress, was inefficient and had failed to provide a strong, centralized leadership. The result was that the Army was still unpaid and hungry, exhausted, and felt unappreciated. Soldiers circulated petitions which lambasted the Continental Congress, and more than a few spoke of the need for a coup to overthrow their civilian leaders. Washington was always aware from his own experience in the British Army that poor material conditions could lead to a revolt, and he sympathized with his soldiers. He had the potential at this moment to capitalize on his popularity and march on Philadelphia with his troops, installing himself as emperor of a new republic. No organization could have mustered a force to oppose him. His army had driven Britain from control of the colonies, but the revolution had, as of yet, failed to produce an alternative system of government that could prove itself formidable. Yet Washington declined to capitalize on the historic moment. Instead, he prepared a speech for his disgruntled soldiers where he upheld the principle of military submission to a civilian authority, an important precedent to establish for the young country. Always vain of his image, Washington needed glasses to read his prepared remarks. He paused to put them on, which is a rare sign of vulnerability for the hero of the Revolution. "Gentlemen," he said, "you will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have grown not only gray but almost blind in the service of my country." Many soldiers started weeping when they saw their leader humble himself before them. There would be no mutiny. Washington's refusal to become a military despot turned him into an even larger-than-life figure. King George III is said to have been in disbelief that Washington would refuse power in this way, remarking, "If he does that, he'll be the greatest man in the world." Decades later, as an exiled prisoner on St. Helena, Napoleon would lament that everyone just wanted him to be another Washington. Washington returned to civilian life, leading many of his countrymen to dub him the American Cincinnatus, modeled after the famous Roman general who gave up his dictatorial powers after leading Rome out of a period of emergency. When Washington would return to power, it would be as a civilian in charge of an elected government, not as a militarily imposed monarch. 4 months later, another Washington would flee for his freedom in a very different way. The American Revolution spawned an ideology of rights and self-government that excluded whole castes of people. Jefferson, who wrote "All men are created equal," owned 600 human beings over the course of his life, and like his contemporaries, was not willing to part with his material interest to fulfill the ideals of revolution. Even as most northern states used their revolutionary momentum to abolish slavery in varying degrees, a racist ideology asserted itself across the nation that some groups of people were not equipped for responsible uses of freedom. The principles of self-government required a responsible, intelligent, thoughtful citizenry, leading many people to believe that Native Americans, blacks, women, and even poor whites must be excluded. This is one way that men who held human beings as chattel justified fighting for freedom. In this context, Britain used contradictions in the American Revolution to their advantage. British generals offered freedom to Virginia slaves of rebel masters. This was undoubtedly opportunistic, as many royal governors held slaves, and back home, the British Parliament was beholden to a capitalist class heavily invested in Caribbean slavery. Regardless, one of these men, a native of the Senegambia region of Africa, Harry Washington, ran away from George's plantation upon hearing of Lord Dunmore's proclamation of freedom. He served in the British military, fighting on the opposing side of his former slaver in the Battle of Yorktown. With British defeat, George Washington was insistent in negotiations on return of all seized property, especially runaway slaves. But the British general he was negotiating with quietly let runaways evacuate to Nova Scotia to avoid being forcibly returned by British politicians willing to cooperate with Washington's demands. Once in Nova Scotia, Harry Washington and other exiled Africans faced intense racism. They eventually resettled in the British colony of Sierra Leone in Africa, where Harry rebelled against British authority and fought for black self-government. Like his former enslaver, he would even be elected the leader of a community of exiles in 1800. After this, Harry Washington disappears from the historical record, but presumably was at least able to die in his native Africa, a free man. Harry Washington's story reveals the tragedy of the American Revolution and how its initial high ideals were ultimately subverted by forces of reaction. Contrasted with George's story, we can examine the highest aspirations of self-government and the cruel reality of the American experiment for too many people. The unfinished work of the American Revolution created the conditions for a young nation both beholden to a slaveocracy and asserting its place as a people's republic. The fulfillment of revolutionary ideals remains incomplete, as does the historical verdict on revolutionary America. All right. Well, that was a long introduction. But my name is Bill. I have a background as a history educator.
My name is Kevin, and I'm a philosophy student.
My name is John. I'm Bill's friend, but I read a lot.
And we're going to just talk about every president in order. But I did want to start by having you guys say your favorite president and your favorite almost president. Or your favorite, like, could have been president. Like, my favorite president is Lincoln. My favorite could have been president is Eugene Debs.
Nice. Solid picks. I'd say, yeah, my favorite president's probably...
Nixon?
Yeah, big Nixon guy. Mostly for, like, the paranoia, but no,
Relatable.
I enjoy FDR, and in a similar way, I'm a Bernie Sanders enjoyer, so maybe 2028. We'll see.
It's hard to pick. I thought Grant was a really fascinating figure in history. It's probably because I read a whole biography on Grant, and it was probably the last one I read. But his work prior to being a president as well as a president was really interesting, especially kind of revealing of, how far America had come within its period of time up until and after the Civil War, but also how far it had to go, and kind of the tragedy of what could have been with Reconstruction. I guess one of my other favorite presidents is Obama, which is kind of funny because I think one of my favorite would-be presidents was maybe Romney, frankly. And it's probably not where I align politically now, but I think with a Romney, we wouldn't have had a Trump. And you can probably guess my opinion on Trump through that Mr. Podcast. But
Yeah, this is a MAGA podcast.
Yeah, based off the intro, I could tell we were doing America Hell Yeah. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
All right. Well, let's just jump in. George Washington. He was the first president. He was kind of born poor, but he also inherited 11 slaves when his dad died when he was 11. Maybe 11 isn't their double, but well, I think it was just like the way money was inherited. Most of it went to his older, like...
What's 11 times 11?
121.
Nice.
Yeah.
What? Shut the fuck up. He was kind of raised by a single mom because his dad died when he was 11. I read this book called You Never Forget Your First by Alexis Coe, which is a little like, it's a cheeky title, and the book's a little bit like that tonally, but she emphasized that George Washington's mother was a big influence on him, although he kind of hated spending time with her his whole life. He started the French and Indian War because he was in the British military, and they sent him on a diplomatic mission to meet these French soldiers in the frontier, and they just attacked and killed a bunch of people. One of his native allies split the skull open with a tomahawk and took the brain out of this French diplomat they were supposed to meet with.
Nice. So that's pretty fucking hardcore.
Yeah. And then Washington was reporting back on what happened. This was basically like a world war that was about to unfold from this
one incident
kerfuffle. And Washington was writing back, and he spent 8 pages complaining about how he wasn't getting paid enough. And then he was like, by the way, we fucked around a little bit.
P.S.
You remember that?
Franz Ferdinand was shit.
Yeah.
I've attached his scalp.
Yeah. Alexis Coe says, if the American Revolution had not taken place, Washington would probably be remembered as the instigator of humanity's first world war, one that lasted 7 years, because that was the French and Indian War.
Yeah.
And then Washington doesn't even really fight in it, because he's pissed that because he's an American, he can never advanced, I think, past a colonel in the military. And he's like, I'm being discriminated against, and so he, I think, ends up quitting the British Army pretty early, becomes like a land surveyor. He's pissed that he's being oppressed, so he decides to go claim a bunch of like Indian land in the West and be like, this will be mine.
Good displaced anger there.
Yeah.
He left the army, he became a land surveyor.
Yeah, he left the army, became a land surveyor. So that was the thing about his like class background, from what I understand, is he wasn't like he wasn't like dirt poor, because obviously they enslaved a handful of people, and but he wasn't from like the aristocracy like Jefferson and Madison were of Virginia. So he didn't get much education, but he had connections to wealth, and he pulled some strings to get like a land surveying position. And eventually, I think he buys out his half-brother's widow, I think, for Mount Vernon, which was obviously like his famous plantation slash enslaved people concentration camp, or whatever. But
lovely place.
Yeah, but he ends up being very rich, and by the time of the American Revolution, part of the reason he gets the job is because he's rich enough that they don't have to pay him, and the Continental Army is god awful at organizing money, like taxing, raising funds. It's a miracle that was like the governing body that got through the revolution, because they were so incompetent at that, because it was basically almost like 13 separate countries trying to have a cohesive national policy, and none of them wanted to pay taxes to like a federal authority that didn't respect them. And Washington is in charge of like a continental army that is supposed to represent the 13 colonies, in working in tandem with 13 separate state militias that are also kind of doing their own thing. So it's pretty disorganized, but Washington wants to be the leader, like the general in charge, but all these guys are like obsessed with ancient Rome. Yeah. So it's really bad to be seen as like campaigning for a job. Right. So I think John Adams nominates Washington for it. And he's the man in that instance.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is like, it is remarkable just how like George Washington, the whole thing of like him willingly giving up his power as president and just being like, I don't want to be a king, like we don't need to do that, despite the fact that like there were surely people and interests in the country at the time that would have like completely welcomed that. That is like a remarkable achievement for this guy. George Washington.
And we definitely are like, I'm sure we all like have a materialist understanding of history, and like it's not just like one dude that makes or breaks historical momentum, but it is kind of hard to see.
You're not a great man theory enjoyer.
But in this instance, it's like Washington was a uniquely like well-suited figure for winning the revolution. He's not actually like a great general. He's good at running away when like cutting his losses and running away. There's like a few instances where they call it like the American Dunkirk, because like they could have captured the whole army, but he just like hightailed it out of there. So that's what he's good at doing, is just like quitting. And that's why he's remembered famously too for quitting being president and quitting being in charge of the army.
This guy's had the Masterville ability to say, fuck this, I'm going home.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone likes him because he quits his job. It's like when Joe Biden said he wasn't going to run again, and all these liberal pundits were like, that is the best thing you've ever done.
It's the best thing you've ever done.
That's the best thing you've ever done. Just decide you don't want to be president for another 4 years, because Jesus. Yeah.
I expected that.
Washington, but he becomes very interested in independence, because part of it is like, he wants to take all this Native American land in the West, and he's claimed a ton of it as a land surveyor, and that's probably part of the reason he didn't have a lot of ambition for power. Like, he just wants to be rich. And,
seems like a recurring theme in the revolution is People just not wanting to pay a lot of taxes.
I was gonna say, like, I don't know, it's the type of thing where it's like the materialist history of it, like it is. I think it's somewhat reductive, probably, to just say like, oh yeah, and then like the emerging like bourgeoisie class in America was just tired of having to like bend to the whims.
They want to pay their fair share.
Right, but it's like that just kind of seems what it comes down to.
Well, that's definitely part of it, and part of it is also just like why like a lot of like old school Marxists like the American Revolution is it's like replacing an archaic system with a more modern capitalist one. Because and this stuff like pisses off George Washington too, where it's like England got the Industrial Revolution, they got capitalism, and then they got industry first, like, and they wanted to basically make the whole world their customers for all the commodities they were producing.
Right. So
George Washington has to sell his, slave-made cotton through England, and all the like farming equipment they have to buy from England. Like they're not able to get their own industry. I remember that Hamilton book talked about the guy that brought industry to America, just memorized like an English factory plan.
He was like a savant.
He just like studied this English factory, like because they had steam, and he just like stared at it long enough and then sailed to America. And it was like literal espionage.
Yeah, one of the first industrial espionage. Really good industrial espionage, frankly. Yeah, kind of crazy.
I'm not familiar with this. You're saying that a guy like just essentially like memorized like the blueprints of some factory?
I suppose. It's been a while since I read the book, aka
awesome.
a year. It's probably been, 7 for you, but...
Yeah, I read it like 9 years ago. But
9 years ago.
This guy, England had like steam power and industry, and the Hamilton's economic program was really dependent on getting that for America.
Right.
And Washington also, like, even though he was a slave owner, did not see slavery or agriculture as like the future.
Right.
And was really content.
Anti-Jeffersonian.
Yeah, he was a federalist in all but name, which basically meant he wanted banks and capitalism and industry. And like Jefferson was like, nah, dude, like we're gonna be a agricultural country. And slavery is kind of, it'll fade away or maybe not. I don't know, but
kick that can down the road.
Kick that can down the road. They're all happy to do that. They all kind of tell them like, well, not all of them, because there's hundreds of founders, but guys like Washington just kind of tell themselves like, slavery is on its way out. But before we get too into that, like the industrial plant, some guy in England memorized how they built like these steam like run like proto factories and then sailed to America and just rewrote the plan.
That's awesome.
Like a savant.
It was kind of nuts. Yeah, it was kind of like Rain Man, but instead of like matchsticks, it was a loom. Yeah.
But Washington kind of believed like, and a big thing with like slavery too was in the upper South, like Virginia, North Carolina, it was really like depleting the soil. So it either needed to expand westward, or it was like, this is probably phasing out in favor of like a free labor system. Which is why like slavery, when it wasn't profitable, these guys are so dependent on it going west because they need to sell off their excess like enslaved workforce. Which, was like, the way we're talking about like feels dirty because it's like this is like inhumane like monstrosities, but they thought of thinking about it like in a capitalist mindset. That's like a big reason why they were insistent on slavery moving west, and we'll talk about that more with the Louisiana Purchase when we get there. But before the cotton gin, at least there was some plausible deniability, I guess, some of these guys had, because it was mostly tobacco farming. And then cotton became immensely profitable around 1790.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like the idea, like, George Washington thinking, like, this is just phasing out. It's like, that's not really what seems to be happening. I don't know if that ever really seemed like it was happening. Anyway.
It's a nice idea. I had no idea about the Harry Washington thing, by the way, going back to the intro. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I read this book about a month ago called Death or Liberty, and it was all about slavery between the end of the 7 Years' War and 1800. So like
Yeah.
during the time of Revolutionary America. And part of the book, every book, like every chapter has like a little like anecdote about a specific like, enslaved enslaver kind of dynamic. And they talk a lot about Billy Washington, which is like George Washington's favorite.
Classic character.
Yeah, it's like George Washington, like his favorite slave. Basically, he accompanies George Washington. He fights in the Revolution with him, and then he cripples himself because he falls off a horse and is in so much pain. He's just like getting liquored up all the time, and George Washington's just like this lazy asshole.
Oh, jeez.
And then he's the only person George Washington frees outright in his will when Washington dies. And he writes like, because of Billy's affection for me, I suppose I'll give him his freedom. And it's like he can't admit it is totally like George Washington had a weird, messed up paternalistic affection.
How old was Billy when George Washington died?
I don't remember, but
there's something in that that's like darkly hilarious about like being able, like only being freed after your master's died, and like I can't imagine how old he was. I mean, like I don't know
he was definitely
at that point,
younger than Washington because he lived. The one, I guess, like thing people like say like is at all redeeming, I guess, with George Washington's slavery is he provided he gave everyone he enslaved a pension in his will, and said like the younger ones will train to do some like useful like craftsmanship, like I've set aside some money to give them a skill, and the older ones I'll give them like $30 a month or something. And so Billy, because he like after he fell off the horse the first time, that like coincidentally happened again at another point.
Jesus Christ.
And so he was really like, because after he fell once, I think they retrained him as like a shoemaker, and then he lived out his days like at Mount Vernon, and people would come make like a pilgrimage out there, and they just like swap stories about the Revolution. Because I think he lived for like a fairly long time. George Washington dies in 1799.
Of what?
You're trying to get me to say HIV.
Yeah.
For context, that's something that I've convinced people of is true, including your boyfriend.
Yeah.
But
You tell me that he didn't die.
Queer history.
yeah.
Queer icon.
George Washington.
I want to talk one thing too. I know we're bouncing all around Washington. During the Revolution, he has like hundreds of people shot for desertion or like insubordination. Like he's a real hard ass disciplinarian. They had that in that history show we watched where there was like leading a mutiny. He would have like the people that were supporting the mutiny shoot the leaders of the mutiny.
Dude, fucking talk about being obsessed with ancient Rome, just
Yeah.
mowing these guys down.
That's dark. But I would say according to the Alexis book, the British military was pretty much open about just like raping and pillaging. And Washington tried to keep the Continental Army restrained from that to win over the civilian population.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not as true when it came to the Iroquois villages they raised.
Yeah.
In retaliation for some Iroquois raids on white settlers, George Washington issued an order that said the immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now on the ground to prevent their planting more. So, that's like, that's an oof.
Yeah,
That's pretty.
That's a big oof.
That's a tough one to read. That's pretty.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked.
That's like that's like some Israel
Yeah, holy
kind of
shit.
stuff. Like, I mean, that's just ethnic cleansing, not like outright genocide, but no but to that, period. Washington also had a vax mandate. I don't know if you guys heard this. People brought it up during
Fucking
COVID.
tyrant.
People brought it up.
Pandemic.
Yeah, people brought this up during COVID because all the patriots were real hyped up on not getting vaccinated. They were like, well, like George Washington had the Continental Army inoculated for smallpox, which is basically like they cut you open and put a little smallpox in your open wound.
Put a little like
So it wasn't really
pussy blood.
Yeah, it
from some
wasn't.
guy.
Pretty much.
It wasn't like a vaccine, like a clean needle where they swab you, and it also, unlike vaccines today, this is legitimately dangerous.
It's like live virus. The
Like,
other one's like dead virus.
Yeah, it kills a lot of people, but it kills fewer people than letting smallpox burn through the army would.
Yeah.
In the British military, a lot of them die of disease because they don't have this. Martha Washington, though, is anti-vax.
Oh.
She's terrified of vaccines.
She did yoga, I'm guessing.
She was really into juice cleanse.
Yeah. She's really into like the all natural kind of vegan juice cleanses. Yeah, Martha Washington. No, Martha Washington is actually really like vehemently racist too. She's not a hippie. She's just terrified of like getting cut open and infected with smallpox on purpose.
Not unreasonable in some way.
But she gets vaxxed to visit George at Valley Forge, which was a big step for her. But yeah, we can talk about Martha for a second. This is funny how marriage worked back then, because George is like understanding. He was like, I want to get rich, and he basically found a rich widow, and her husband died like 9 months before. She had a couple kids, who also like they both, after George and Martha get married, they end up dying like tragically young. But she's like, whatever, so move on, and they basically, I think they meet like 3 times, and are just kind of like, yeah, you want to. This seems like mutually beneficial, so they get married. George Washington, towards the end of his life, does start to have some reservations about slavery. He writes a letter where he says something like, I don't think there's anyone more interested in ending slavery in this country than myself, which that's not true.
That's just not at all
It's
true.
not at all true. Just because you have like an intellectual interest in like, what if we got rid of slavery? It's like there are people you are with.
Let me update my will to keep a billion slaves for the rest of my life.
But he's at least like, I know this isn't going to look very well. Martha is like, she's talking about like they're enslaved people, and she's like, these devils. Like she just like hates them. And Washington's will, like half of the enslaved people that work on their plantation are like legally belong to Martha's because they belong to her first husband's like estate, and she doesn't ever make any moves to free them.
Christ.
They're passed down to her family. One of her grandchildren marries Robert E. Lee, I think.
Oh.
And the Custis family, like they continue to be big Virginia slavers for a long time. So not a lot of people like George Washington freed his slaves in his will, but not many of his like friends and family took that initiative. Hold on a second.
Tea break.
Yeah, I'll take a tea break.
Smoking a lot.
Yeah. The Continental Congress is bad at raising money, so they pay their soldiers in credit and land that they're going to steal from the Indians, because a big reason they fought the Revolution was Britain had this proclamation line, 1763, and they said you cannot settle west of that. And a lot of Americans were like, George Washington was like, well, I've kind of claimed a lot of that land already. So they give soldiers land grants out west, and that's how like states like Kentucky end up getting settled. They also give them like American money, which is useless. So a lot of capitalist speculators buy it for like pennies on the dollar. And then after the Constitution is ratified and the National Bank backs up the money, it ends up being very valuable. So all these Revolutionary War veterans are like destitute because they sold when they were desperate.
Just like immediately for like a couple loaves of bread.
Yeah, when they were desperate, they sold it for pennies, and that was like a beef between the Hamiltons and the Jeffersonians. Jeffersonians were like, we're not doing right by our veterans. And Hamilton was like, that's how it works, man.
Capitalism, baby.
That's capitalism. These guys put some faith in our currency. Can't we reward them? I know we're spending a lot of time on Washington. We'll try to keep it moving a little bit, but
Equal 1/16 for every president.
yeah. Well, Washington is probably the
Pretty
most important
important.
one because Yeah, after the war, he retires, and he comes back, and like the family member he had managing Mount Vernon did a terrible job, so he's like in arrears and owes a bunch of money to whatever bankers, and he's trying to get the slave camp up and running again. A lot of people, like, Washington is like a legend, like that story I talked about where in the beginning where he doesn't do like a military coup. Like, he's like a marble man to people. So people go to Mount Vernon just to try to see him, and he's kind of annoyed by that. Like, he's amused by it, but then he has like these stairs installed in the back of his house so he can kind of like slip by them because he doesn't like strangers.
Starts wearing sunglasses everywhere.
He starts wearing sunglasses and hoodies.
Just being a recluse.
Yeah.
Staying in, talking on his Discord friends and all that.
Yeah, he's a gamer.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to not spend a lot of time on George Washington, like being so of that revolutionary moment.
Yeah, and
being the figure.
You never forget your first.
Right. And when they write the Constitution, they write it like George Washington, I think, is officially president of the Constitutional Convention. They're basically like, they're presenting like we're going to fix the Articles of Confederation. But they get there and they're like, this shit sucks. We got to do a new thing. And they basically write the Constitution with the understanding that Washington will be the first president because he's the only one like everyone basically trusts. Someone's like, all right, he doesn't talk a lot during the convention. He's like a centrist between the different factions, I guess. Everybody likes him. They're all like, he's the man. He's got to be the president. I think James Madison actually comes over to like Mount Vernon and is like, you got to be president, because he really doesn't want to be president. He's like, I just want to get on Discord. I just want to get on Discord and be rich. He's like, I got to get my ducks in a row. Like, he wanted to be in charge of the Continental Army, but he doesn't really want to be president, which is why everyone's like, you got to be president. Because they trust him not to be ambitious. It's like the worst thing you can be to these guys. But he agrees to do it. When he's traveling to New York before the capital was switched to Philadelphia, this is interesting. Like, people go out and they cheer at him. And in a monarchy, the people bow to like the king. There's like, because they're not citizens, they're subjects. Right. They're serving the king. But Washington bows to the people, and everybody fucking loves
they ate that shit up, man.
Yeah, so he
just a bunch of peasants being like, you bow to me.
But yeah, Washington loves that. So like, and the people love it. So he just makes that his move.
Hell yeah!
And he starts doing it everywhere. He stops off on his way.
Poor dirt-covered farmers in Virginia.
Yeah, dude,
who can't even vote in the first place. Well, you bow to me.
It's huge, dude. Everyone loves it. And to be fair, I like that move. That's a good move.
Yeah,
I like it. He's like, no, it's very symbolic because this is like one of at this time period of history. It's like this is the only example.
Kind of completely novel, right?
Yeah, this is pretty novel. It's like no, I serve the people,
right? And
everyone loves that. So he does it a bunch of times. I do like to think that people are like, George, you can.
They get it.
We get it.
It's getting really overdone with it. You're hitting like a 90-degree angle.
With his dumb speech, you know.
I like to picture like John Adams being like, okay, George, you don't have to do it for like a cabinet meeting. We get it. No, we're glad.
Just get very pissy about it. Just like
we're glad you're on board. He insists on paying his own way to the Capitol too. He doesn't. There's a lot of rich people that are like, let me pay for your room and board. He pays for it all, his own. And I'll just say for his like, just as an aside, these planters are really, really rich in people and land. They're not rich in capital. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's why guys like Jefferson and Madison hate banks, because they basically, I mean, one reason at least, they owe a bunch of money to the banks who have mortgages out on their plantations. So these guys do not have a lot of capital.
Liquid capital.
Yeah, liquid capital. They have a lot of land and people. And that's an important thing to understand, because wealth doesn't operate in the same way back then as it does today in a much more like advanced, late stage, whatever, capitalist economy. But I was reading that Alexis book about how Washington doesn't want to owe anyone any favors, and just like imagining like a hard cut to Trump being like, the Qataris said this is the best jet. Like
They gave it to me personally.
like just got hard cut to like Trump, like all like the Gulf monarchies just like booking out his hotels,
Yeah,
which like
exactly.
he doesn't really make a pretense of like dissociating himself from.
He's
and-
so jazzed.
Yeah, and like him doing these White House remodelings is just paid for by like Google and like all these oligarchical tech companies. So like we've done away with this where like George Washington's like, you can't even pay for my room anymore.
There's not even like the pretense of that anymore.
Yeah, it's not even getting funneled through lobbying dollars. Or
No,
anything
no.
like that.
Just naked corruption.
Yeah. Rolling in it.
One of the first things that they do when he's president is the new House and Senate is debating or is set to ratify a treaty that's basically going to steal a lot of Indian land from these tribes that live in like modern day Georgia, Creek land, Creek and Cherokee land, excuse me, and Washington, like all these guys, basically believes in like, we got to civilize them and get them to farm and do capitalism and own land ownership like white people do. But while they're debating this treaty, the Constitution says that the president should make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate, and nobody really knows what that actually looks like. So Washington goes to the Senate in person and is like, all right, what do you guys think of this treaty? And everyone's like too timid to like challenge him or ask him questions. So you just picture a bunch of people like...
And he's bowing at them continuously throughout the process.
They're all just like, looks
great.
Looks good. Looks good. You just picture like a quiet, like, here's some guy sipping a coffee. And it's like, looks all right. So he's like, whatever, that doesn't work. So he just has them debate it, like, without him. And in case you were wondering, they don't steal any land, which is why there is a thriving Cherokee Creek Confederacy today.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the southeast of the United States.
In the great state of Georgia.
That's why Georgia is over 50% Creek Cherokee land to this day.
Exactly.
Because they decide, you know what, this is wrong.
Yeah. American expansion ended there.
Yeah. That's why we're filming this podcast in Philadelphia.
Yeah, we're not allowed.
Not
Past the west.
Not smelly onion.
We talked about the Hamilton's like industrial and banking plans. Washington basically backs Hamilton. Jefferson is Washington's Secretary of State. And he and Hamilton just...
Yeah, they're big rivals.
They just yell at each other every meeting. They hate each other. Excuse me. Washington likes the bank. Its job is to issue currency, oversee the national banking system, and assume the interest payments on state debts. I'm getting this from the book as well. While the federal government would run the bank, it wouldn't own it. A group of wealthy investors would essentially own the bank. And Hamilton's big idea is like he wants a national debt because he wants rich, powerful people to have a vested interest in the United States succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
And Jefferson frames his like argument as like, you're going to make the people beholden to a system of bankers. And I don't know what he means by the people is a very,
Right.
Who knows what that means, because he's probably like, I hate paying my mortgage. Jefferson
moratorium on mortgage payments.
Jefferson just wants to read books and
Based.
doesn't want to pay money to a bank. But Washington likes the bank. Like I said, the planters though, like Washington's contemporaries, are cash poor but land rich. So in this kind of like emerging, like a lot of before the Civil War, America has like this tension between a kind of emerging bourgeois, merchant, capitalist class. I know those aren't all exactly the same thing, but between that and like the planter aristocracy.
Yeah.
And for a while, the planter aristocracy actually just kind of runs things, to way oversimplify it. But Washington is actually more interested in industrialization. Um, are you guys big French Revolution history buffs?
At one point I was.
At one point, let's channel that.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about the French Revolution, but
Yeah. Well, England and France start fighting because France starts revolutioning and then they start beheading people.
Yeah, Robespierre.
Washington says we're neutral. A lot of people are like,
Pissed off.
yeah, a lot of people are like, France helped us. We got to back them up.
it's their problem, man.
Yeah. Washington, and this is like Hamilton's thinking too. They're like, hey, we signed a alliance. The Continental Congress, which doesn't exist anymore, signed an alliance with King Louis, who is decapitated by you guys.
Right.
So these two defunct organizations made an alliance. They're like, you're on your own. It's a little bit of a dick move, but it's, I guess it's fair.
Even though it was like directly inspired by the American Revolution.
Right. And
they were basically doing the
also
same thing.
happened the same way. The American Revolution was kickstarted because Britain started taxing the colonies to pay for the French and Indian War. The French Revolution kind of got kickstarted because they spent a lot of money.
Just throwing shit at us, right?
Yeah, because fighting
French and Indian War.
No, fighting the American Revolution.
Oh.
Because we should have made that point earlier, but we would not have won that without France.
Yeah.
The American Revolution almost gets turned into like a proxy war between France and England.
Yeah.
But we're like, hey, we appreciate the help, but we're gonna sit this one out.
You're on your own, man.
You're on your own.
You're like across an ocean from us.
And it probably, like, if we went to war for that, it could have been like become a civil war in America because like the Hamilton wing of the country loves England. They want to basically model America like England. Hamilton is kind of quasi-monarchical. They want to basically do what England does with industry and capitalism. So some people are, and a lot of them are also get pretty freaked out by the French Revolution when they start decapitating like hundreds of people, thousands. And some people think it's a little far that they cut off the king's head. So they get a little wild with it. But yeah, Washington says we're going to be neutral, which is like precedent that America's not going to get involved in foreign European wars that basically last till World War One, more or less. And ever since World War One, we've famously decided to just mind our own business.
Yeah, of
foreign
course.
policy. We went right back to that policy.
Yeah, we saw what happened with the proxy wars with France. We decided never to involve
we'll never get
ourselves in a
involved in
proxy
those.
war
Wars
again.
is bad idea.
Yeah, luckily. Washington is... So Thomas Jefferson ends up resigning from the cabinet because he's really pissed about the Hamiltonian policies. Washington actually only wanted to serve one term, but then Jefferson said, you gotta run again or this country's gonna fall apart. We really need you. He's like, you can resign right after you get reelected. And then he gets...
We know how much you love quitting.
Yeah. And then but if that had happened, it might have set the precedent that presidents have to resign. Like they just serve until they get tired and quit. And then Jefferson ends up saying, fuck this, never mind, I quit anyway. Washington, by the end of his term, people think it's still like taboo to directly criticize him. So the Jeffersonians kind of say, like, oh, Hamilton is manipulating Washington, who's this feeble old man who doesn't know what he's doing, which Washington hates because he is very thin-skinned. He doesn't like getting criticized.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably part of why he didn't want to be president was because he liked being just like a legend, not like a partisan political figure.
Yeah.
He hated parties. Right?
He hated parties.
Yeah, having to do like the important political work that turns one into a legend.
Yeah, he didn't. He didn't like that. Yeah, he has a farewell address that's really bitter and pissy. He's like, "You guys are," and it's really angry. And then even Hamilton, of all people, is like, "You might want to tone this down." Like, chill. Just like Hamilton was famously like,
"See how deep I bowed to you."
Yeah, he's not bowing to the people anymore. He's like, I'm done.
Yeah, time to bow to me.
And then it's like the thing with Biden. Like when he quits, people like historians and people today talk about it like, oh, he set this 2-term precedent. If he ran for a 3rd term, which people wanted him to do, but he absolutely refused, he might have died in office. And then the precedent is just like, well, presidents just can
around
keep
till they die.
getting elected till they die. Which, thankfully we don't believe that at all anymore. We only elect healthy young people.
Healthy young people. We have no offices that are for life.
No,
Certainly not in a major...
person occupying the presidency is not physically decaying before our eyes.
Yeah.
His hand's fine. It's fine.
Absolutely nothing wrong with his hands.
Nothing wrong with this guy. We have not had like 2 presidents in a row that everyone expected to die in office.
Any second.
Any second.
Well, no, it's bad when they start giving him jelly beans.
Yeah. When Washington's...
Auto pen.
Yeah. I guess we can talk a little bit about John Adams now. Oh, I do want to tell the John Lawrence story. You guys know this guy, John Lawrence?
Not familiar.
Okay, it's not super related to Washington, but I think this is really interesting. I think it's in the Hamilton musical, which I have not seen, but if you're familiar with that, you might know this. But there's this one of the founding fathers from South Carolina is this guy Henry Lawrence, who got richer than God selling slaves.
Oh.
Nice.
Yeah, we're preemptive. Hell yeah.
Yeah, a little too.
Yeah, stifle that one down.
Yeah. No,
I retract my.
He sold.
Yeah.
I'm pretty
We'll
sure.
fix it in
I
post.
think I read this guy like probably transacted like 15,000 slaves. Like he's not just a slave owner. He is a like
It is
trader.
wholesaling.
Yeah.
He is
right.
a trader in human flesh.
Jesus.
Slave flesh.
And his son is this guy John Lawrence, who goes to Europe to go to college, and he literally becomes woke and gay in college.
Nice.
Like he comes back, he's
Read a bunch of Marx and Foucault.
Right. No, he comes back and he's like slavery is terrible. He's super into the revolution, like the most like liberal interpretations of it, where it's like this is a dawn of a new humanity where everyone's equal. Like we should get rid of slavery. And he tells his father like, do not leave me your slaves in your will. I would set them free. I would rather be poor to be a slave owner. And he literally writes to his father like, do not confuse this with like youthful idealism. He's like, this is my firm conviction. And he and Alexander Hamilton both fight in the American Revolution under Washington. They're really good friends. They might be gay. That's the Chernow book talks about that, I think, where it's like these guys
They're just really good friends.
they're really good
roommates.
friends. They like holding hands and
In the words of my mother, really good friends.
they're really good friends. But then during the Revolution, like basically at the tail end of it, like the Yorktown surrendered. So like there's not an official peace treaty, but the armies are basically laying down their arms. John Lawrence is I don't remember exactly what he's doing, but he's out like patrolling and he gets shot and killed, and it's very likely he was killed by a freedman who joined the British to get his freedom during the Revolution. Just based on like where he was when he was killed. So it's super depressing and frustrating that like one of the most like one of the only people that is like from deeply entrenched in the slave society. Like South Carolina is the most rabidly racist reactionary part of America, at least in this like period of time up to the Civil War when they're the first state to secede. Like the only guy who came out of that system like woke like gets killed by probably a freedman.
Fucking British dude.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but we live and we learn. All right.
John Lawrence.
John Lawrence was the man. People should remember him. All right, do we want to talk about the man, John Adams?
Yeah,
Dude.
Paul Giamatti himself.
Yeah, Paul
Man,
Giamatti.
myth, legend.
John Adams, to me, we've talked about, he's a very George Costanza-esque character.
John Adams. I know almost everything I know about John Adams just comes from the HBO miniseries, and I'm content with that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, from what and that is a good miniseries, and it informs a lot of what I know, too. I mean, I've read about him, like, in other books he's been in. I haven't read, like, a biography about him or anything, but he just seems to constantly be pissed off at having to play second fiddle
To everyone in his life.
about this, like, he has a very inflated sense of his importance and definitely perceives a lot of insults from other people. I'm looking for this one quote I have from him, if I can find it. You guys talk about John Adams while I look for this.
I think he was married to Abigail Adams, which is cool because it's, two A's. It's alliterative.
Mm-hmm.
His son was president, so that was kind of cool. First dynasty in American politics.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
We love establishing that. Good thing he wasn't the first president, I suppose. He was a lawyer. He was stout.
Yeah, they call him his rotundity because he's short and stout. That's what they call him.
That is such a fucking excellent insult.
That's what they call him when he's vice president.
His rotundity.
Yeah, his rotundity.
Excellent.
He has a crazy... Hold on one second. Let me see if I can grab this. He wants the president to be called... We'll cut some of this. Where is it? Okay. He tells George Washington we should call the president not Mr. President, but His Highness, the President of the United States of America and protector of their liberties. And Washington is like, we're not. That's like, what is wrong with you? Washington's high off bowing the people.
Yeah, have you not been watching me bow continuously for 8 years?
Yeah, so Washington is pissed with Adams for suggesting that and basically sidelines him as VP, which is kind of why the vice presidency doesn't matter for a long time, because Washington set this precedent that, like...
Has it ever mattered?
It is funny how, like, the formal way that our government actually functions is just modeled on, like... Or I shouldn't say just modeled, but is at least in a not insignificant part modeled on, like, just the personal dynamic between these guys at the beginning.
A little bit, yeah. Okay, here's the slavery quote, and I think this is a very, like, telling, because you can see him getting, like, pissed off that he's not getting more credit. He goes, I have, through my whole life, held the practice of slavery in such abhorrence that I have never owned a Negro or any other slave, though I have lived for many years in times when the practice was not disgraceful, when the best men in my vicinity thought it not inconsistent with their character, and when it cost me thousands of dollars for the labor and substances of free men, which I might have saved by the purchase of Negroes at a time when they were very cheap. He's
so aggrieved.
He's so aggrieved. He's like, I could have done it, but I didn't. You're welcome. Just like, that is who this guy is.
Just fucking careful not to pat yourself on the back too hard there, man.
Where's my hug?
Yeah, like I said, they call him his rotundity. He doesn't like people making fun of him because he's very self-serious. He says of being vice president after he gets kind of sidelined, my country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceives. I can do neither good nor evil. I must be borne away by others and meet the common fate.
Dude, holy shit, this poor guy.
Which is, I think, like, it's a much longer way of saying what FDR's first vice president said: the vice presidency is not worth a bucket of warm piss.
Yeah.
Very Selena Meyer.
Yeah. So he tries to preside over the Senate because that's what the vice president is supposed to do. But he's like, dude, what the fuck is this job?
Right.
Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Looking at my notes, he just kind of hates everything. He hates democracy, but he also hates Hamilton's banks because he thinks it will swindle the poor.
Yeah.
But he also doesn't trust the poor to run things. He's a very big believer in the Protestant work ethic, which is why half of that miniseries is him just, like, knee-deep in pig shit trying to build his farm. So he doesn't, like, he gets up at, like, 5 a.m. to, like, read the Bible and work on, like, he doesn't, like capitalists and merchants and bankers who get rich without doing any labor. And that's why, the similar reason he doesn't like slavery. It's like, he's like, you need to do something productive.
Yeah.
You know? idle hands and everything.
You lack the industry.
You lack
the fit of an American.
You lack industry, the fit of an American. But one thing he does really like is he's a big like rule of law believer. He defends those guys, the Boston Massacre soldiers, because he believes like everyone deserves a fair trial. His famous quote is like a government of laws, not of men. So, something interesting I don't think people talk about, this isn't in the miniseries as far as I remember, is...
I don't know that then.
What?
I don't know that then.
That's okay. You're just here to listen.
I'm just here to have fun, folks.
We're just a couple extra listeners for the podcast.
I'm having fun with the audience.
You guys know about the Haitian Revolution?
A little bit.
Yeah, actually a good bit.
Yeah. I read a good book about that like a while ago called The Black Jacobins by C.L.R. James. That's not where I'm getting this information. I read about this in that book, Negro President by Garry Wills, which is about how that's what people call Jefferson because he only got elected because of the 3/5 compromise. And that book, Death or Liberty, talking about how John Adams actually backed the post-revolutionary Haiti because he got involved in this quasi-war with France, where it was like an undeclared war where we were like sniping each other from our ships and whatnot. And he wanted to play Haiti off of France because he was a little bit worried. He was like, look, I don't like slavery, but I also don't want a slave insurrection. So he's a little bit worried that revolutionary France would team up with its technically still colony Haiti and invade the American South and incite a slave insurrection. Mm. So he's like, that's
horrible.
Yeah, that's your opinion. Not John Adams' opinion. So he's like, that's court Haiti into kind of our sphere of influence. But in that process, he does do some genuinely like fascinating stuff for this time period, where he sends a diplomat, I think Timothy Pickering, Secretary of State, meets with Toussaint Louverture. I might be butchering his name, but that's the that's the leader of the Haitian Revolution, and they send a Haitian diplomat to America, where he meets with John Adams, and that's the first time a U.S. president ever has dinner with a man of color. And I don't think that happens again until, I don't know, like I don't think the president meets with like a black man as an equal until Lincoln meets with Frederick Douglass, like 65 years later-ish. And then Adams like sends advisors to Haiti where they actually give them advice on like state building, and they open up trade with Haiti. Like they do take a genuine interest in like Haiti succeeding as an independent country. I think it's still called Saint Domingue at this point. I might be butchering my French, but that's okay. They're not a real language.
Yeah, that's
but and then I guess we can switch to Jefferson now, because Jefferson is not about any of that shit. He is terrified of the Haitian Revolution, as are most slave owners, because that is like the biggest nightmare for these guys, like having to pay for the horrible shit they've done. Yeah. Jefferson isolates Haiti, doesn't trade with them. Basically what we've been doing to Cuba since Kennedy, like embargo or whatever. Like they're not recognized diplomatically until Lincoln is president. Like they don't get any diplomatic recognition from the U.S. until Lincoln's like, these fucking assholes left the country. We can be a little bit more chill now. But so Jefferson cuts off Haiti and backs Napoleon's attempts to invade and retake the country, reestablish slavery there, which goes horrible for Napoleon. His soldiers just die of disease and get picked off by the slaves. They're not the freedmen, I should say, who are like much more invested in fighting because they're literally fighting for their own freedom. Yeah. And that's why Napoleon ends up selling the Louisiana territory to the U.S. because he spent so much money trying to retake Haiti. Oh, you guys got any Jefferson stuff?
Jefferson and Hamilton fucking hated each other's guts, through and through. I will say, like, Jefferson as a president, I know a little bit less of, but Jefferson as a guy, as an intellectual, was really fascinating. I will give him that. He was like hyper literate. He was like, you were not far off on him saying like he just wanted to read books because he was just doing that all the time. He's left some really interesting philosophical writings. He was not very introspective about his whole owning human beings thing, which is not great. But
well, I have a lot about that.
Oh,
about how he thought about that. He has this quote about slavery where he says, "We have the wolf by the ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is on one scale and self-preservation on the other."
Well, maybe he was introspective. He was making that shit
I
up.
don't know if that reminds you guys of anything today, but it reminds me of a lot of stuff.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. It reminds me of Israel and Palestine, the wolf by the ears thing.
Right.
Because he's basically saying, like, this is wrong, but what am I going to do? Free them? They'll kill me for all the horrible shit I did to them.
Right.
And Jefferson, like you said, he's very interesting intellectually. In a lot of ways represents the best and the worst of sort of the Enlightenment outgrowth that is taking off in America at that time. He got a copy of the Bible and he cut out all of the religious aspects of it and just left
Fucking base.
he just left the teachings of Jesus in there because he liked Jesus as like a philosopher, but he wasn't into Christianity.
Dude.
The OG cafeteria Catholic right there.
Yeah. he's so he's an interesting guy. He doesn't like that book. He doesn't like publish that. It's just his personal book because like people hate him
poser.
if the president was like, "Hey, I tore up the Bible." But because Jefferson is very, he's very into revolutions too. He's like the Trotsky of the American Revolution. He's like, we got to export this everywhere.
Permanent revolution.
But he has this, like, a lot of... So, yeah, he is racist as fuck. He has this... he has to have a rational, like, Enlightenment justification for racism, because a lot of racist people say it's Noah's curse of Cain or Canaan or whatever. Like, they have a biblical mythology for why they think...
He kept that in the Bible.
Yeah.
He cut out the only religious part.
He kept that part. No. But Jefferson is he has he comes up with like and I think there's a good video by this guy Autumn Shea on YouTube where he talks about there's a video about the American Revolution and he talks about how for a lot of these guys being a Republican and all men are created equal is not a contradiction with their belief in inferiority of some groups of people and slavery and their belief in slavery because the idea is basically some people are not responsible enough for rights. I got this long quote from Douglas Eggerton. It was the historian of that book I read where he says, "Classical Republican theory, which emphasized responsibility over rights, demanded a great deal of its citizens, on whom the burden of government now rested. Pamphleteers of the 1780s consistently described ideal voters as disciplined, virtuous, self-sacrificing, hardworking, and wise, all traits essayists attributed to European civilization and so to Euro-American males. Whiteness, as a result, was an important component of Republican ideology." So Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, but he also writes a book called Notes on the State of Virginia, where he outlines his like very historically early pseudoscientific theories of racism and black inferiority. And this allows Jefferson to, quote, "flatter himself as a benevolent and humane protector of his inferior black wards until that day when slaves might somehow be colonized elsewhere." So that is like the seeming contradiction in Jefferson. That's not as much of a contradiction as it might seem. And the book I was talking about literally describes how like abolitionists quote the Declaration of Independence and like slave owners quote Notes on the State of Virginia like at each other, citing the same guy to be like, this is why our cause is right. And I see this like line of thinking, like I was talking about Israel earlier, like there's the aspect of like we have to have slavery for our own security, there's also the like, you know, it sounds very much how people talk about like Palestinians now, like they're culturally inferior, and that's why like, you know, people say like Israel is like a bastion of like Western civilization,
Right.
and like it's a lot of like, you know, Islamophobia and like cultural racism, because they're not saying like they're genetically inferior,
Right.
but it's this way that like these sort of
It's finding some justification for why these people don't truly count as people in a robust sense.
Right, and why these people are not responsible enough to be given the rights of self-government.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that like I've been thinking about more and more recently, because I think it's like under talked about and very important to understanding, you know, like the history of this country and beyond this country, like why, you know, because in that sense, like there's always been an other group of people, and Jefferson says this too about the Spanish and French subjects when he buys Louisiana. He says like they're not ready for self-government because they lived under a monarchy, so we need like a temporary like dictatorship over them, and we need like to send Americans there to teach them how to understand self-government. So like there's always like an other group of people that seemingly doesn't count, whether it's like Native Americans or like whatever immigrant group. It was Catholics, now it's Muslims and communists.
Right.
And, you know, like there's always a group of people where it's like they don't understand, you know, like
conveniently consolidating power to the currently ruling class.
Right. And Jefferson is probably, I think, the best example of that, of like these early presidents, which I waited to and talk about as much with Washington, because Washington's not like a deep thinker like Jefferson is. Having said all of this, Declaration of Independence kicks ass. It is a great document. There's a reason that it became like a standard, like almost like a boilerplate example for everyone, from like the French Revolution is inspirational to I think the Latin American revolutions, to like Ho Chi Minh in the 40s quoted the Declaration of Independence and said like all these the beginning of it is so historically iconic and so like well written that it is a springboard for a lot of like historically progressive things.
Right. Well, I mean, it's such a, you know, I mean, again, like, I guess to not lean into the great man history, you know, too much, but there's like, I know I heard someone say this before, and I think it's a good way of putting it. When we think about like the quote unquote great men of history, it's not so much that these men found like whatever certain kinds of forces at their disposal, but those forces found them. And the Declaration of Independence is just like such an epoch-making like moment, and such an epoch like defining document that, you know, really just like carries world history forward in that way.
It does feel like a turning point in world history, and you know, Jefferson kind of sucking doesn't you know, I mean,
doesn't
really
make the Enlightenment wrong, you know.
So Jefferson is a, you know, fascinating guy, and
one thing that I actually learned from the Eric Andre show, which I believe is actually true, is John Wayne quoted notes on Virginia.
Oh God.
John Wayne once said, "I believe in white supremacy until blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." Why did you retweet that?
He was like being very racist, and he said something like blacks need to be educated to the point of responsibility or something.
Right.
But this was like in the 60s.
And that's the dark side.
That's the dark side of Jefferson's legacy.
Of Jefferson's legacy, and by extension, the legacy of like, quote unquote, like Enlightenment liberalism.
Yeah.
You know, it has some historically progressive things, but also like the, I guess, like Enlightenment supremacy, like that we're talking about, like Washington civilizing the Native Americans. It's like just like inability to conceive of like maybe these guys are doing something better than we are, you know, or maybe like you know, and that's why like I brought up like you know, we can talk more about Israel Palestine when we get to Biden, I guess, but
we got a ways to go.
Yeah,
we got a ways to go.
We're talking about this early.
We don't have to like jump ahead
At this
to
point,
1948.
it's just Palestine. I think, or the Ottoman Empire at this point.
Yeah.
He was controlling those lands. I don't even know in the 1700s.
So there's something else before with Jefferson I think is interesting, which is the you guys ever heard like the Barbary Pirate Wars?
Oh yeah, we talked about this on Christmas Eve.
Okay. Well, that's the thing. Like there was a I looked it up. I don't remember his name, but there's a historian who wrote a book about it. Just like trying to be like objective. Like for people who don't know, the Barbary Pirates were these like North African states that kidnapped. It's hard to figure out how many exactly, but maybe
2,000, 3,000, something like that.
more than that. Like,
Right.
but over a period of hundreds of years.
Oh, why
So-
the Americans got involved? They
Yeah,
kidnapped
yeah.
like
It
2,000
wasn't.
Americans
It was. It probably at least tens of thousands over centuries. But
Right.
basically, they would kidnap like European and American sailors and either just like use them as like slaves or ransom them. And a significant part of the federal budget was paying these people not to do that, so we could trade. and then because we're like that was like I think that was like what most of the budget was going to.
Paying our like fucking
And-
mafia protection.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they
essentially, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure John Adams had some kind of treaty where because like a lot of this stuff was like they were Muslim pirates who said they had the right to kidnap like non-Muslim subjects, infidels, and it goes back like some of it goes back to like long-standing beefs like between Europe and like the North Africa going back to like crusading.
Yeah,
and,
the Seleucid Empire.
yeah, and I think that's why John Adams like had a treaty I think where he said America is not founded on the Christian religion, like we're doing our own thing, keep kidnapping all the Europeans you want, and of course like early European slavery also had like an out where if they converted to Christianity, you're supposed to let them go. But we had long ago abandoned that pretense. We were like, no,
It's not profitable.
it's getting too, it's getting too easy for them to get out of this. But yeah, Jefferson sent, I think working with like the Kingdom of Sicily, like was like, I don't want to keep paying this like mafia protection.
Right.
So he sent I think the Marines, and that's why like the Marine anthem today has like the shores of Tripoli in it.
Halls of Montezuma.
But I was telling the story about the historian because he wrote a book about it, and then like years later it was like I'm getting all these like emails from like white supremacists that are trying to prove that white people were enslaved also. So like unfortunately like the history of that is very like politicized with people that are like there was white slavery.
That's fine.
Which is like this should explicitly say this was not the same scale or level of severity at all to the
Yes, it was.
triangular slave trade. Again, I feel bad for this historian who just tried to research it.
I have something to talk about off podcast. We'll talk about it later.
Anyway,
Jesus Christ.
I do want to talk about. We talked a little about the Louisiana Purchase. It's funny. I was talking about Jefferson. Is like these people need training in being Republican. Some people are like, then we shouldn't annex them. We're going to bring a bunch of French and Spanish savages in who don't understand democracy. So backfired a little bit.
Like
But
they know so much at this
yeah,
point.
but obviously most people are like, sick. Let's double the size of America.
It was a pretty good get. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, it was a good get. We should also talk about the Louisiana Purchase. Like I talked about earlier, the like people need to sell off their excess slaves because it's not profitable. Like they have some planters, especially in the Upper South, have too many slaves to like
Work the
feed and
land.
house for it to be profitable. And like in some cases, it's becoming more profitable for them to just hire seasonal free laborers.
Right.
So they want Louisiana because they need to send slavery westward for it to keep working for them. They need to sell them to up-and-coming planters out west. And part of that, too, is why the transatlantic slave trade is officially abolished in 1808 under Jefferson, because it makes slaves that people own way more valuable. In addition to, like, even hardcore defenders of slavery are kind of like, yeah, this is pretty inhumane. But that's another reason Louisiana Purchase happens. The only state that is like still adamantly like pretty pro transatlantic slave trade is do you want to guess which one?
South Carolina?
Yeah, South Carolina. Because after the American Revolution, they reopened the slave trade, because so many of their enslaved people ran away that they needed to like repopulate that group of people. And even people like Jefferson think it's a little bit inhumane to take people who are already free and make them slaves. But South Carolina.
Not South Carolina, though.
South Carolina is like easy for you to say.
Yeah. Apologies to our South Carolinian viewers.
Yeah, there's sort of really dark part.
Apologies.
It's a really dark part of that Douglas Eggerton book where he's talking about how South Carolina reopened the slave trade, and even other slave-owning politicians are like, dude, because the slave trade is so barbaric that like there's like African bodies washing up on the coast of South Carolina.
Christ.
Yeah, of like people that tried to jump overboard or died in the passage.
Jesus.
Like it smells. South Carolina smells of death.
Christ.
Yeah. Not to bring. Must be a bummer, but
I mean,
it's pretty.
Yeah,
I
really
think
harsh
it's good to
tonight.
paint a picture of how horrific
I
it
do want
was.
to paint a picture. But Jefferson officially abolishes that. In practice, slave trade kind of continues for a while. And later, when Abraham Lincoln's president, he and the British Empire sign a deal to like mutually police the African coast to try to like actually stop the slave trade. And Lincoln ends up approving the execution of a American caught participating in the slave trade, which is, we might be anti-death penalty, but I think we can say that's base. Right?
That is pretty base.
Do you guys know much about the Embargo of 1807?
First I've ever heard of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if it sounds exciting.
Sorry, the Louisiana Purchase was caused because of the Haitian Revolution?
Yeah.
Or am I skipping ahead?
No, I talked about that a little bit because Napoleon spent so much money trying to recapture and re-enslave Haiti.
I feel like in the American high school history, I think I had a very good history education, like top tier. Like we were in the same district.
Right.
We didn't really talk about the Haitian Revolution. And like the more I learn about it, I'm like, this was a huge thing
It was a huge
for the
deal.
Western Hemisphere.
It was the
did
second-
not know that the Haitian Revolution was a thing, so I was like 19.
I thought you were going to say until 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
I thought Haiti.
I've learned
was
so
hard to
much
France.
now.
Yeah, Haiti fought for their freedom and is punished for it ever since.
Yeah.
We should
That is
teach
true.
about it. Black Jacobins, right, pushing that book out.
A great book. It's not about the Haitian Revolution, but it does talk about just Haitian history generally. It's called Mountains Beyond Mountains. It's actually a book about like, I think y'all would find it really fascinating because it's actually like kind of materialist in some ways, but it's about a doctor, like Dr. Paul Farmer builds this like health program out in Haiti, but it's really fascinating. I learned so much. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Should learn more about Haiti.
You should sit your white ass down and listen.
No. I should sit my white ass down and listen to the white man sitting next to me.
I didn't watch the Cleveland show.
Okay, let's talk about the embargo for a minute. I'm going to give... Doesn't sound exciting. It is very interesting because we didn't talk about this with John Adams, but he doesn't take criticism well. People are shitting on him during the quasi-war with France. So he passes the Alien Sedition Act and puts people in jail for criticizing him. Only like 10 people, I think, get convicted, and Jefferson ends up pardoning them.
Nice.
It's a very like early violation of the First Amendment.
Just like immediate.
It's like immediately we were like, you cannot criticize the president. And John Adams, you just picture John Adams being like, they called me a balding, toothless hermaphrodite. Abigail.
They called me my rotundity. So funny.
And
Rotundity. That's a fun nickname.
but people today, I feel like they talk about Adams like it's an autocrat for doing that. Jefferson did some dictator shit to enforce, like both in how he wanted to govern Louisiana and in enforcing this embargo. Basically, England was like so many British sailors were deserting and going to work in New England and the north of the U.S. It was like they were so dependent, like they were an essential like laboring part of New England and like the merchants and everything. So Britain would periodically like stop American ships, search them, and retrieve their deserters, which was kind of a standard practice of war, but there was an incident where a ship refused to let it be searched, and the British fired on it and killed 3 people and wounded like 18 or something. And people are like juiced up for war, and
Nice.
Jefferson, even though he hates England, kind of pussies out and says, you know what, we're not trading with anybody. He like takes his ball and goes home. We're not going to trade with England or France, but mostly it affects England. We're just going to embargo both of them. And England's like, we don't, okay. Like, it doesn't hurt England at all. It cripples the American economy.
Great.
Hell yeah, dude.
Like people are like desperate and starving, and New England is hurting.
There'll be a little bit of pain.
Yeah.
Not too much.
It hurts New England the most, where they hate Jefferson and they're Federalists. They like England. They were fine with like their ships being searched because they're like, whatever, cost of doing business. So people start ignoring it, and Jefferson needs a quasi-police state to enforce it. Even his allies are like, you should chill a little bit because like this is pretty unpopular.
Yeah.
He says of people caught smuggling, and this is from the Wills book, if all these people are convicted, there will be too many to be punished with death. My hope is that they will send me full statements of every man's case, that the most guilty may be marked as examples, and the less so suffer long. He's basically saying, I'll decide who gets to die.
Dude, yeah,
like,
holy
it's
shit.
psycho shit. And he hates merchants. He sees them as useless middlemen. You know, he's like, why don't you just be a planter? A yeoman independent farmer. Jefferson is... the embargo is thought of as, like, initially, like, a temporary thing. But Jefferson, like, till the day he dies, is very in favor of it and never like backs down off of it. And even his own political allies that are in positions of power in the North are like, I'm not going to enforce this because I will lose my job. I think it's pretty much repealed either right at the end of his term or when Madison takes over. But yeah, the embargo is interesting, and it's weird that we don't remember it.
That is an interesting, like, because I mean, I don't know, I don't think I've ever even really heard of this, and if I had, it was maybe in a sleepy like freshman year history class. But I mean, it shows to me like we're talking about, I feel like a theme of this conversation has kind of been like looking at like the Enlightenment values that gave rise to America versus like the actual reality of how they panned out.
Well, not even like that being a contradiction, but like the, you know what I mean, like the coupling of like the nasty stuff is part of the...
Yeah.
But sorry, finish what you were saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, like highlighting the ways in which it's not a contradiction, but then also highlighting the ways in which, like, it is a contradiction, where, you know, like, you're founding a country that is meant to be this, like, Republican, not oppressive government, and then immediately...
Right. And
values
Jefferson is the biggest hypocrite.
Right.
Because he's like...
the guy that is actually
has,
the learned, like, philosopher.
Well,
of...
in a lot of ways, because, yeah, he has strong words condemning slavery and the slave trade, but then is, like, more than likely a child rapist with one of his slaves, basically the Sally Hemings case, who's very against a strong federal government. When Washington is president, he authors Virginia and Kentucky resolutions with Madison, which basically say states are allowed to nullify federal laws. Like, he believes that, but then he wants to hang people who won't obey his embargo. Like,
his crazy embargo.
His crazy embargo. Now, the one thing I will say about the embargo is it does set an early example of, like, trying to peacefully resolve pressure to get involved in a war. He's saying, like, we're not going to get involved, but we're going to punish you. We're going to do something. And it inadvertently does, like, probably not what Jefferson wanted because he hates industrial, like, capitalism, but it gives a boost towards industrialization in the North.
Yeah.
Because
they have to kind of trade
they
the raw materials
to start making our own stuff. And, yeah, there's another story, the embargo I forgot to mention. The island of Nantucket is starving because they're not getting flour imported. and they request food from Jefferson. He says no.
Okay. Just solid.
Just
Yeah.
nah.
Like, so
I
like,
think we're a welfare state? Those haven't even been invented yet.
yeah, dude, it's crazy. Like this is really just like such a bad idea. But whatever. Okay, I know we're like an hour and a half in, and we've only talked about three
presidents.
There's a lot to say. There's not as much to say. Look, after these three guys, there's less.
The next 13 will
Fucking
fly
rapid
through.
fire.
Fly
around.
through these guys.
James
Madison,
Madison
War
was
Who
a
gives a
guy.
shit?
We'll fly through this. I was gonna stop and be like, we didn't even get to talk about why Abigail Adams was awesome, John Adams, but
Dude, yeah.
we'll put a pin in that because
President 2A, Abigail Adams.
Yeah, let's go backwards.
We'll just say real quick, Abigail Adams is like a proto-feminist.
She was pretty basic.
She's very anti-slavery. She's John Adams' intellectual equal, if not superior. They have letters back and forth their whole lives. The scene where she dies is the saddest part of the John Adams miniseries.
That fucked
Great,
me up, dude.
great lady. We're not going to talk about her. All right. All right. Kevin, I know you studied up on James Madison.
He's
Yeah,
got a PhD in Madison.
I took a solid 180-second look at James Madison's Wikipedia page.
Yeah. But Madison basically is the principal author of the Constitution. And I do want to say, like, the Constitution, a lot of people, and I kind of agree with this, like, the revolutionary momentum of America. Every revolution, you know, we were talking about the Russian Revolution.
Yeah.
They have a period of, like, momentum and then kind of conservative retreat.
Right.
Where it's like, we're going to do all these amazing things and remake the world. And then people start to be like, all right, that's not too crazy. And I think you can kind of see, like, that feeling play out in things that happen today. Like, think about how left a lot of this country felt during 2020, the George Floyd protests. And then 4 years later, Kamala Harris is running as, like, I am the best cop in the country. You know, so try to think about it like that. Like, every revolution has a momentum and then that kind of conservative reaction.
I'm the best cop.
The Constitution is kind of like that for America because it's really, primarily, the Constitution is solidifying private property rights. A lot of it is just like contract enforcement.
Right.
And then division of powers, which makes it very, very difficult. Like, only one part of the government will actually be directly elected, and mostly by property-owning white men exclusively. Mm-hmm. So it's not. It you know, it gets expanded to be a little bit more democratic, but even in this day and age, it is, in my opinion, like holding us, like the Senate, the Electoral College, the insane amount of power the judiciary has, is a negative thing for like positive change. I'm only talking about it now because Madison is the primary architect of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I think the separation of powers in the Constitution gave America stability for a very long time. And for better or worse, you know, like ensured like a peaceful exercise and transfer of power. But Madison, when he's back in the Constitution, is a very big fan of a strong centralized government. He also is a large part of, I think, the author of the Bill of Rights, which I think is like kind of the last revolutionary momentum out of the 76 generation. And he adds the Bill of Rights to get states to ratify the Constitution that are skeptical of surrendering their state sovereignty to a federal government. And then after that, he becomes a very like Jeffersonian. He's like, suddenly he goes back and he's very anti-strong central government until he's president and he wants to do a war.
Until he's like, actually, it'd be awesome to have a ton of power.
Until he's president and he's like, it's really hard to manage a war without a central financial regulatory system and with like strong central power. He's like, my philosophy sucks because they declare the War of 1812 in response to like the British impressment of American sailors. Allegedly, they're kidnapping like Americans and putting them in the Navy. I think for the most part, they're like still just like looking for deserters. And they're alleging like England is aiding Native American raids against white settlers, which is, kind of true. Yeah, like the War Hawks in Congress, John Calhoun and Henry Clay are these guys from the West. They're from Kentucky and Tennessee and whatnot, and they want to take land from the native tribes out there. I think Britain actually stops the impressment, but word doesn't reach America. And by the time it does, we already declared war. So
Nice.
we're like, shit. Okay,
That's awesome.
well, we already committed. It's the first time a president asks for a declaration of war. Is also the most close vote for it in Congress. Like, it's a very close vote. The North loves England. They don't really want a war, but the South and the West do. Do you guys ever hear of the Shawnee chief Tehcumseh? Yeah. So this is where he allies with Britain because he's basically we need to unify like the Indian tribes. He's like the Western expansion is gonna steamroll all of us if we don't put up a united front against it. Because a lot of colonialism is really like divide and conquer strategy, like picking winners and losers with the different indigenous people and and
fracturing the rips in already
and
existing conflicts.
exploiting real conflicts between them and but also manufacturing some. And he's like his idea is kind of like a more modern Native American state, like a confederacy out west, and he gets killed by future President William Henry Harrison, and that dream basically dies with him. But he's a fascinating guy. It's worth looking up. Pretty immediately after the War of 1812, England also sails to D.C. and burns down the White House. We're just getting our asses kicked.
Yeah.
We try to invade Canada. Jefferson tells a newspaper that conquering Canada will be a mere matter of marching because they want freedom. And
Nice.
it's
Haven't heard
not
that one
it's
before.
not the first time we try to quote unquote liberate some people that don't appreciate it. Canada at this point used to be it's just like Quebec and they're Catholic. And they're like, these Americans are racist as shit against Catholic people. we don't want after England took Canada from France, they basically said, we'll leave you guys be with your culture and your religion. America, we kind of hate Catholics at this point. So Quebec is like, no, thank you. We don't want this. So that's why Canada today, America doesn't remember this war. England doesn't remember it. Canada kind of looks at it as almost like their founding story. Because they repelled the American invasion. And I think also our generals were just drunk incompetence.
Nice.
So yeah, unfortunately we do not. It'd be cool if we had Canada today. But they're probably happy that we don't.
51st state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not too late.
It's not too late.
Not too late.
The other big outcome of the war in 1812, the Battle of New Orleans. So when Andrew Jackson becomes a national celebrity, the war is already over. Peace was negotiated with I think the Treaty of Ghent in England, but it takes so long to get that word back to the U.S. that we're still fighting wars in late 1814, early 1815.
Nice.
But Jackson does kick ass at the Battle of New Orleans.
Hell yeah.
And people are like, hell yeah, dude. We
This guy
won.
can oppress some natives.
This guy's the man. He's nothing problematic about him. We love this dude.
Let's put this guy on the 20.
And then the treaty gets back and they're like, the war's already over. I think my high school history teacher compared this to scoring a game-winning touchdown after the fourth quarter already ended. That's what the Battle of New Orleans is.
Nice.
But it's a big, strong, patriotic moment for America. During the Battle of New Orleans, there's this thing called the Hartford Convention. Are you guys familiar with this?
No.
Okay.
Sounds like insurance policy.
Yeah, it does, but it's even cooler than that. It is the remnants of the Federalist Party in New England are so pissed off about the War of 1812. They are dependent on trade with England. They never wanted this war in the first place. So they have a convention where they float the idea of seceding from the U.S. and forming a like New England Confederacy. Word of this convention gets out right when the Battle of New Orleans gets out, so everybody hates the Federalist Party because they're like, you guys are talking about destroying this country when we were in the middle of the best battle we've ever had. So the Federalist Party functionally dies at this point around 1815. It's like the last casualty of the War of 1812. But a lot of their policies are accepted by Madison, who, like I said, says, you know what, maybe we do need a central banking system and a strong federal government to actually be able to do anything. He kind of comes back to the more Federalist camp after he gets his ass kicked in a war over and over again. Personally, he's also the shortest president. He's 5'4".
Short king.
He's a short king.
Good for him.
His wife is like younger and hotter than him.
Wow.
Dolly Madison. She's actually like the life of the party. People really like her. He's just this like weird.
He's just there.
He's just this like weird loner that likes to read books.
Nice.
He's like Jefferson. You know, they're not good speakers. Jefferson, I think, gave 2 speeches the whole time he was president. Madison also just wants to like read books and be a nerd.
Those were the days of being a nerd
Dude, yeah.
Being a nerd
and
slave
somehow
owner.
being president. Try doing that now.
Yeah, being a nerd slave owner.
Those were the days.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. Elon Musk is like Madison.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Kevin, I know you read up a little bit about Madison. You got anything to add?
No, I think that's like that about covers it.
Were my facts correct?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. All right. We'll keep it moving because...
Do you guys want to take a break? Because I'm like,
Yeah, let's take a break.
I'm like running out of steam.
All right, let's take a break.
I'm just constantly tearing.
Let's keep going. Let's talk about Monroe. You all right?
Yeah.
All right. Monroe is he's like Jefferson. He loves the French Revolution. He is so like into the Revolution stuff that I think he actually opposes the Constitution, and runs against Madison for the Senate, the first like Virginia Senate seat ever. But he eventually comes back into the Jeffersonian fold. I did want to tell the story when he's governor of Virginia around 1800. Have you guys heard of Gabriel's Rebellion?
No.
So Gabriel Prosser was an enslaved guy who planned like a uprising, and he was working with, it was in Virginia when Monroe's governor. He's working with free blacks, other enslaved people, and even a lot of poor whites. It's a very cross-racial, like class-based uprising, and their plan is to take captives, including Monroe, the governor, and hold them hostage for like an end to slavery. And 2 enslaved conspirators snitch and tell their enslavers what's going on, and Gabriel flees, but Monroe gets word of it and mobilizes the state militia, and they capture most people involved, who a lot of them turn state's evidence, and many of the slaves involved in the conspiracy are either sold further south, which is usually like a pretty harsh punishment, because slavery is worse where the proportion of slaves to white people is the most stacked in favor of the slaves. Like South Carolina is like 60% enslaved, so slavery is like the most brutal there, and it's even worse
to keep them down.
Yeah, and it like functionally it has to be more brutal to enforce it. And it's even worse in the Caribbean, where it's like 10% white people, and they're just overseers, because all the slave owners are like capitalists in England who are just absentee owners. But they eventually capture Gabriel, and he is, very badass. He doesn't turn in anybody. He doesn't snitch on anybody. He tells the court they do give him a trial, and he says, "I have nothing more to offer than what General Washington would have had to offer had he been taken by the British and put to trial. I have adventured my life in endeavoring to obtain the liberty of my countrymen, and am a willing sacrifice in their cause." Yeah, they don't let him go. They obviously, but that's the book that's from that Death or Liberty book, and it uses that as kind of a bookend where the forces of reaction have fully enveloped the revolutionary zeal. You know, Governor Monroe, they're putting down a true revolution, like a workers' revolution. You know, the American Revolution is not going to go that far. Like, that's where it stops. That story is not super related to Monroe, but I think it's worth talking about regardless. But anyway, Monroe has the Monroe Doctrine, famously. Did you want to talk about that, John?
Well, I think I was talking about FDR's
Or Theodore Roosevelt.
or Roosevelt's riff on it, but here was my initial thought, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I said the Monroe Doctrine was basically like a sphere of influence, like basically more or less stay out of affairs, except in North and South America.
Yeah, well, it's in the context. It's actually written by Monroe's Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, who had joined Jefferson's political party, even though his father was the only officially Federalist president. But it's in the context of all these Latin American countries getting their independence from Spain. And it's basically saying Europe's interference is not welcome anymore in the Americas. And I'm not really sure, because I've heard different things, like if it is from the get-go just like American imperialism, like this is our sphere of influence, or if it initially is like we are saying like it is the policy of the United States to not welcome any more European intervention in this hemisphere. Either way, it's not super enforceable right now in the United States. And Europe has its hands in the Americas still. So it's not saying like Europe needs to get out completely. It's just saying like no more. During the Civil War, like years later, France invades Mexico and puts up a puppet like dictator. And they do that. And America's like, this is a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. But the idea is France is able to do that because America is fighting itself and, doesn't have the energy to repel that. But yeah, they
put a Habsburg on the throne, don't they? Like Napoleon,
something like that.
Yeah, Napoleon the Third.
Yeah,
I read. There's a book called like The Last Emperor of Mexico. It was actually fascinating.
Oh yeah,
specifically on that topic. And then like basically the only reason why they were able to get away with it is because we were just involved with our own civil war.
And some people proposed ending the U.S. Civil War by pretending like we weren't fighting anymore, and the North and South both invade Mexico together to kick France out. That was something like
kind of hell yeah.
That was something like this guy Francis Preston Blair floated to Lincoln. He was like, "Hey, the South can save face this way. We quickly reunify." Hell yeah, but we didn't. I guess Lincoln didn't want.
Chimichangas for everybody.
I guess Lincoln didn't want to do that.
Selfish.
Party pooper.
Yeah. Monroe also runs against the dying Federalist candidate in 1816, and then 1820 he basically runs unopposed because the Federalist Party is gone, and they call this the era of good feelings because everyone kind of likes Monroe. He tours the country. He's like, yeah, everything is chill, nothing's going on, and then they want to admit Missouri to the Union as a slave state. And this is like one of the first instances of slavery taking a very central role in politics. I mean, obviously it's central to
nothing
everything.
Political before that.
Yeah, but this is where it's becoming like a partisan like issue that Congress is dealing with because they prefer to just ignore it. And we talked a little bit earlier that the 3/5 compromise of the Constitution gives slave owners representation for their enslaved people. So if you're a slave owner and you own 5 human beings, you get 3 more votes for those human beings. So slavery needs to expand, not just because economically viable. Like, they have to sell off their excess enslaved population, and they're depleting the soil, so they need more room for plantations. It also, they want to expand it because it is their political base of support. It gives them disproportionate influence. Equally true at this time, the North is outnumbering the South anyway, where it's starting to not matter as much, so they need to hold on to the Senate and keep that 50-50 split between free and slave states. So the Missouri Compromise basically says they will admit Missouri as a slave state, but they will also make Maine a free state, which before Maine had been part of Massachusetts. But it's starting, I think, to have like its own political state identity. And then they say Missouri will be the only example of slavery above that,
Mason-Dixie line.
Yeah, whatever the longitude,
30-something parallel.
whatever the parallel is, I don't have it in front of me. But like Missouri, we're not going to have slavery above this, except for Missouri. And if it exists already above it, we'll keep it there. And Jefferson writes, this is really bad. Congress shouldn't stop the expansion of slavery. He calls it the death knell for the Union, which, it's kind of right. Maybe not in the way he intended it to be. But this is the first. They have another 30 years later, the Compromise of 1850, which we'll talk about, where, they find a politically convenient way to kick the can down the road on the slavery question. You guys want to talk about John Quincy Adams, or did you have?
So John Quincy Adams joined the party that was opposed to his father's.
Yeah, he actually backs the embargo that Jefferson was a fan of, the stupid embargo.
Oh.
But he's an American nationalist. So like, while he's Secretary of State, Andrew Jackson is fighting the First Seminole War, which is the Seminole tribe in modern day Florida and Georgia, is like doing guerrilla warfare against American troops there. And America, America really wants to conquer this tribe because slaves run away from Georgia and join the Seminoles and then participate in the raids. And this is getting to be a problem for people that would be a problem for, the bad guys of history. But Jackson tells Monroe, I'm just going to invade Florida and put an end to this shit. And just decides to do it anyway. It's like MacArthur later during the Cold War, just taking a lot more initiative than maybe was asked of him. So Jackson invades Florida. He finds two British diplomats who have been assisting the Seminoles, has them executed.
Nice. And
it causes a huge international controversy. And a lot of people are really think Jackson's a military tyrant for invading Florida without authorization to. And John Quincy Adams actually defends Jackson and was no, because then they get a treaty where Spain sells Florida anyway. So all is well that ends well, I guess. But that was interesting for him, John Quincy Adams, to take that position, because it does not seem to reflect his politics later.
Which are
much woker than invading and killing Indians to re-enslave black people. Yeah, that's not really John Quincy Adams' thing. But he runs against Andrew Jackson and a couple other guys. Henry Clay is one of them in the election of 1824. The Electoral College is really weird, and nobody gets a majority of the votes. Jackson gets a plurality. And the 12th Amendment says that therefore the top three candidates get sent to the House, where each state gets to vote as a block. And Henry Clay is he's going to be the Whig leader. He really wants to be president, but he doesn't come in the top three. He helps persuade the House to give the election to Adams, who then makes Clay Secretary of State. And Jackson is this is bullshit. He calls it a corrupt bargain. It's stop the steal. 1824. He spends so then Jackson's because Jackson had the support, I guess, of the common landless white men who are emerging more and more as they're getting the suffrage in state after state. Yeah. Like his political accolades.
They had their own male loneliness crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. They basically make John Adams he doesn't get anything done. Like Adams comes in the office. They don't have the Whig Party yet, but he basically has what will be the Whig agenda. Mm-hmm. He wants investments in internal improvements, which is like infrastructure, canals and stuff like that. Stuff that they don't have in the South because slavery does not promote development of towns and infrastructure. He wants to create a national university, a naval academy, a national astronomical observatory. He wants a...
Build Back Better.
No, he has a progressive agenda.
He's doing an infrastructure.
Yeah, he's infrastructure week.
Infrastructure week, yeah.
Yeah. He wants to complete all these different projects, like a road from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans. Like he wants to centralize this country and make it more modern. I think he's a little bit more progressive. The seminal thing notwithstanding about like Native Americans and everything. None of this gets through. Like his presidency is pretty is the least interesting thing about him. So won't talk about it too much. But after he's president, he gets elected to the House of Representatives. Like some people see that as a demotion from being president, but he enters with a lot of clout and as like an elder statesman, and he serves in the House for the rest of his life. And even though he was never particularly opposed to slavery before, like he's the first president since his father to never own slaves, mm-hmm. but it's not like a pet issue he cares that much about. He ends up taking it up because slavery is becoming such a hot button issue in the 1830s and 40s that the House of Representatives has all these informal rules and formal rules to not even talk about it. Yeah. And they have it's called the gag rule. Yeah. They're like, nobody's allowed to talk about it. And John Quincy Adams just keeps finding creative ways to break this rule.
Yeah.
And he rage baits these Southern senators who are like, this is outrageous. What are you doing? There's this one story where he submits a petition from enslaved people, and they're like, yeah, you are not allowed to do that. And he's like, it's not about slavery. The petitioners just happen to be enslaved. He facts and logics them. Awesome. And somebody understands these conservative old guard politicians from the South get really good at the parliamentary rules, procedures. Yeah. But Adams understands that very well, and he's very clever, and he's actually legitimately very funny, even though you think about him and his father as humorless massholes. Mm-hmm. But they're very New England, and both John Adamses would rather you be a dick to them but tell them the truth, tell them straight up, than bury anything in niceties. Yeah. There's another story where he's getting around the gag rule, where he's submitting a petition from a group of women, because for context, anybody could just write to Congress, get 11 women signed a petition, and we're a small enough country at this point where he might get read out loud.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And one of the Southern congressmen is like, there's a mulatto on that list of petitioners. You can't read that. And the guy's like, and John Quincy Adams is like, how do you know who this woman is? And the Southerner's like, I don't know her personally, but I've heard horrible things about her. And then John Quincy Adams is like, oh, well, from what I hear, a lot of slaves end up looking an awful lot like their masters. He's just, and as he gets older and older, he gets radicalized against slavery, becomes an outright abolitionist, as far as I understand, and comes to see it as how.
Maybe we shouldn't do that.
It's a barbaric and evil thing. And that book I was talking about, Negro President by Garry Wills, talks a lot about how that whole the room where it happened thing, where there's a compromise, where Hamilton gets Jefferson to agree for the government to assume state's debt in return for the capital being in the South, just north of Virginia, is overemphasized, and really the slave powers wanted the capital in-slave country,
Right.
because then they don't have to feel awkward about bringing their slaves to the capital.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when George Washington was president and the capital was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania had a gradual emancipation law. So if you brought a slave into the state, and you weren't a resident, but you lived in the state for more than 6 months, after 6 months, your enslaved person would be freed.
Mm-hmm.
So Washington starts bringing slaves up for like 5 months and 29 days, sending them back to get another one.
Christ.
You know, so they're like, what the guys like Washington and Jefferson, like they're like, yeah, the capital's going to be where we have slavery. So John Adams pushes to abolish slavery in D.C. So that it is not so prevalent. Slavery is not abolished in D.C. until Lincoln's president. You know, we keep talking about all these things and then going like, this won't actually matter until we get to Lincoln and something's done about it.
Everything's just a prelude to Lincoln.
Everything's just a prelude to Lincoln doing some good stuff. But, and then when slavery is abolished in D.C., it's the only example, I think, of like compensated emancipation that gets through during the Civil War, where they pay, like the federal government just buys and frees them, basically. But
yeah, none of us said Lincoln was our favorite president. At the
I
start
did.
of this. Oh, I wasn't listening.
I got a framed picture.
I kind of figured. I was looking. It's kind of funny that you got a framed picture. It's awesome.
I was watching that movie. This is a side, but I was watching It's a Wonderful Life, and there's a part in that movie where you're in George Bailey's house, and you see he's just got like a giant picture of Abraham Lincoln. And you're like, these nerds have just pictures of Lincoln in the 40s in their house. I was like, wait, I have a picture.
You've had that picture.
You got a speck in your eye, George Bailey.
But anyway, yeah, Adams is awesome. He's probably the only person that knew, or maybe the only person, because he and Lincoln overlapped in Congress. He might be the only guy that knew both George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And then he has a stroke at his seat in Congress, and Lincoln is part of the committee planning his funeral. But yeah, he loves rage baiting the South, and usually that gets people shot and killed in duels. But I read this book called, I think, The Field of Blood, that talked about the duel culture of America at this point. And the author said that like John Quincy Adams had enough like cachet as a former president that he could get away with, you know, he had president privilege.
Yeah.
Basically, he used his white privilege to
not get shot.
To not get shot, to like blatantly insult the South and get away with it. So I like, John Quincy Adams is cool. Should we talk about Jackson?
Well, yeah, we can open up that can of worms. $20 bill, Mr. Jackson.
The guy who hated paper currency. $20 bill.
Which is the best bill in my opinion. I feel like I love a $20 bill.
It's the most useful, except for the 100. It's probably more useful because that's 520s.
True.
It's true.
The
I
highest.
never really see them in circulation.
The highest denomination for me is my favorite one.
The 5.
Do you guys know who's on the 100?
Benjamin Franklin.
Ben Franklin.
You're right. Yeah. Andrew Jackson is, I think, the last Revolutionary War veteran. He's a child soldier during the American Revolution. His parents die and leave him an orphan, and he's like just a wandering like kid. When he's like 14, he's taken a POW by the British because he's like just like a guerrilla fighter in the Revolution.
Nice.
The British officer orders him to shine his boots. Jackson says no. Like, he spits at him. He's like, fuck you, I'm not doing that. So the British soldier cuts him with a sword.
Jeez.
And that like, this story is very instrumental in understanding, like, how this, like, absolute psychopath maniac became who he is.
Yeah.
Just forcibly became president. He loves dueling people. He's a big wife guy. So
Nice.
he's very defensive of Rachel Jackson because she like fled an abusive marriage and married him, and they found out later like her marriage to her first husband was still technically valid when they got married. So his political opponents basically just call her a whore the rest of his political career.
So
In
he
one
just
instance,
fucking shot them.
yeah. In one instance, some guy I think published a paper calling her a bigamist. This is when he's like a Tennessee frontier politician,
Yeah.
and he challenged the guy to a duel, and he let the guy shoot first, and after that guy took his shot, Jackson very carefully took out his gun and just blew the guy's dome off.
Oh,
Jesus
I don't know if he shot him in the head, but and then after he did that, the people witnessing the duel were like, "Holy shit, you got shot!" They see his boot is soaked with blood.
Yeah.
They didn't even realize the guy's shot hit Jackson.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Are you okay?" And Jackson's like, "If he shot me in the brain, I would have killed him." Jackson, he's like Johnny Sack in The Sopranos. He's so people, I guess, learn not to talk shit about Rachel after that.
Not making hurtful remarks.
No more hurtful remarks. After he ends up running in 1828 again against John Quincy Adams, and the campaign gets very nasty, and people are digging up stuff about his wife again. And right around the election, his wife has a stroke and dies, and it probably didn't have anything to do with the election. But if you expect Andrew Jackson to see that rational,
And of course, Andrew Jackson's reaction to all this was perfectly rational.
It's perfectly rational. No, for the rest of his life, he blames John Quincy Adams for killing his wife, and he holds on to that grudge forever. He's like, those guys killed my wife. So he enters the White House, a widower.
Bloodlusted.
Another thing I think is really funny about this election is this really is proto-Trump type of stuff, because Andrew Jackson is borderline illiterate, and John Quincy Adams is the son of a president. He's the most well-educated.
Yeah.
He's been trained to be president since he was a child, the best schools. And Quincy Adams supporters dig up letters of Andrew Jackson just misspelling basic words, and they're like, "Do we want an illiterate moron to be president?" And the people are like, "I don't know how to spell."
Yes.
They're like, "I don't know how to spell either." So people just feel insulted. They're like, "I want a guy like me.
I can have a beer with him.
I can have a beer with that guy." Yeah, it really is when people make fun of Trump for not knowing stuff, it just tells people I don't know that either. Do you think I'm dumb?
Right.
And but you expect people to want the president to be the most educated, intelligent person.
No, dude.
Apparently, more often we just want somebody as stupid as we are, and that's what the people said. Jackson gets carried off of universal white male suffrage. Around the past 30 years surrounding Jackson's election, a lot of states had property requirements for voting, but they didn't necessarily exclude black people or women. At least in the North. New Jersey, I think, allows women to vote until 1807, but that gets kind of replaced with instead universal white male suffrage. So women, people of color won't be able to vote for the most part, but white proletariat men can. And Jackson gets elected off of that. Do you guys know about his inaugural party? It's another good story.
The event
Yeah, every president has an inauguration where they give a speech.
Somehow
with alternative facts.
Oh wait, wasn't he drunk as fuck for it or
No,
something like that?
I don't know if he was drunk, but he was really the first. I'm the people's president, because democracy was kind of a dirty word for a lot of the founding fathers.
Yeah.
But Jackson is I'm for the people, so he opens the White House up to the common rabble.
The small folk.
And it turns into a days-long drunken debauchery.
Hell yeah.
People are people. There are old
Shitting on
aristocratic.
Nancy Pelosi's desk.
Yeah, there are Washington socialites that remember George Washington, that are watching these drunken farmers that can't read.
That's awesome.
It really is, and this is where it's America is a unique place, because I don't know where stuff like this was going on, I guess, but. And the only way they get the party to end after several days of whatever, people vomiting and fighting and just not leaving, is they put whiskey barrels out on the White House lawn to draw people.
Reese's Pieces.
It's like catnip for the Hibernian.
That's how they get it. That's how they get it wrapped up.
That's fucking awesome.
Just draw them out with more booze.
they just try. Yeah, they realize like that's the only way to get to end, and that's how Andrew Jackson starts his presidency. It's like the first issue they have to solve is how do we get this drunken rabble out of the White House? How do we get my fans out? So there's another instance where one of Jackson's cabinet guys, this guy Eaton, I think is Secretary of War, his wife is in a very similar situation where people are like accusing her of being a bigamist or a whore or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they're being hurtful, and all the other cabinet wives, led by John C. Calhoun, who's Jackson's vice president.
Mm-hmm.
His wife takes the lead in like socially shunning Peggy Eaton.
Right.
And Jackson has like a falling out with his whole cabinet because of this, because he's such a wife guy. He gets like everybody to resign, and then like just relies on his friends to give him advice.
Dude.
They call it his kitchen cabinet. Like he doesn't really rely that much on his actual cabinet.
Fuck yeah.
And then there's primarily 3 things Jackson has while he's president. He gets 2 of them horrifically wrong, and he gets one. He's good on one of them. And the issues: Indian removal, the Bank of the United States, and the Nullification Crisis, South Carolina. So we talked a little bit earlier how Jackson hates the banking system, or not Jackson, but like guys like Jefferson, the planters hate banks, because they're basically, there's 2 developing social systems of slave capitalism, I guess, slaveocracy, oligarchy, and kind of bourgeois Republican capitalism in the North. Jackson obviously represents, he's a Western slave owner. That's why he wants to take the land from the Cherokee and the Southeast tribes, because he wants to expand slavery. And he has a like irrational hatred of banks that is so intense. He sees them as like the old guard elites, even though, by any standard, a slave owner should probably be considered an elite as well.
Yeah.
But I guess a different kind of elite. I believe Henry Clay, who forms the Whig Party in opposition to Jackson, because they say Jackson's a king, and they take the name Whigs from the British liberals who wanted power taken away from the monarch of England and given more to the Parliament. Clay tries to force Jackson's hand by rechartering the National Bank early. So he's like, Jackson's not going to veto it before his re-election.
Right.
Because that would be politically disastrous. So he's going to have to recharter it. But Jackson says, fuck you. He vetoes it. And not only does he veto it, he actively starts bleeding the bank. He starts funneling money out of the bank and giving it to local like state banks, which he kind of sees as like a lesser evil.
Nice.
So he starts like just accelerating the destruction of the American economy.
Great.
And
fuck you.
Very high IQ move.
Yeah, and he's psycho about it. Martin Van Buren, who's like his political fixer, he actually organizes the Democratic Party to support Jackson, and ends up replacing Calhoun as the VP. He like walks into the White House and sees Jackson just like lying on the couch, just like groaning in pain. He's just like, oh, just like raging. And Van Buren's like, Mr. President, what's wrong? And Jackson goes, the bank, Mr. Van Buren, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. Like, he's a psycho. He's having phantom pains from the bank.
Well,
He's in a psychic battle.
He's in a psychic battle with the bank.
Just like the concept of finance capital.
Yeah. It's insane.
That's
awesome. So, yeah, and then we'll talk more about Van Buren next, I guess. But so he hates the bank, which is like, I mean, we're we have pretty left politics, so I'm sure we're not the
I thought we
biggest.
said we were a MAGA podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure we're not the biggest fans of like finance capital, but he's just destroying the infrastructure.
Yeah.
That's like the of like the country's economy. So yeah, then there's Indian removal. I was telling you about that book I read a long time ago called American Lion about Andrew Jackson, and it's a good book, except that the author tries to paint Jackson as like still a good historical figure. Like other than that, it's well written and well researched, but like the author's interpretations of history, this guy John Meacham, it's just not good.
A little too permissive.
It's like Jackson was, look, this is a pretty monstrous person. Like you don't need that. But, and I also read the book like when I was like 14 or 15. Should tell you how long I've been preparing for this podcast.
Give us 3 hours.
But he said, I think, as far as I remember, he claimed Jackson was on the right wing of the mainstream opinion about what to do with the quote-unquote 5 civilized tribes, because it wasn't like universal, like, we just need to remove these people.
Yeah.
There were enough people, and people that were religious, who said we need to have more compassion, and people who opposed slavery's expansion, that believed it was wrong to kick people off of their ancestral homelands to replace their communities with slave plantations. So this whole like he was a man of his time thing is always
Completely holds water, and we shouldn't be critical.
Yeah. Like, it's just like 9 out of 10 times when people say that, it's just to shut down legitimate conversation. And in the case of Jackson, it's particularly like irrelevant because he was pretty bad for his time. Outside of the mainstream opinion, there were people that said we just need to kill all of them, and Jackson's not that far, but that's not super mainstream. And the Trail of Tears ends up
Just being that.
Killing them all.
not killing 100% of them, but killing like a huge percentage of them on the way because it's inadequately supplied, and there's disease and starvation, and that's actually carried out more under his successor Martin Van Buren, but Jackson puts his legislation through. And
wasn't he also in like kind of open defiance of the Supreme Court when he did
yes, that's a good. I'm glad you brought that up. John Marshall, who John Adams put on the Supreme Court, is like the last Federalist holdover in government. And the Cherokee Nation, I believe, because the other thing is like the tribes he's removing basically did what the founding generation asked of them. They started living like white people. They established governing constitutions.
Yeah.
And they also adopted slavery. So I guess it's not completely fair to say that they're going to replace them with, because like there is already slavery there. But so they're not. When they find the Indian Removal Act is passed, they don't take up arms. They go through the legal system.
Yeah.
At least some of them do. They take it to the Supreme Court and say, we have a standing treaty with the United States. You cannot do this. The Supreme Court says, you're right. We can't do this. And Jackson didn't say this, but the legend was like that he said, John Marshall has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. And, that line is as true as anything else. Like, he may as well have said that because set the precedent that you can just ignore the Supreme Court when you disagree with them. I kind of wish we could do that now, but he says, and because Jackson, even outside of being president, his whole as a general with the Seminole Wars and everything, he's obsessed with Indian removal. Interestingly, in one of his battles, after they decimated some Native American village, there was a child survivor, and Jackson adopted the kid and basically was like, I'll civilize him or whatever, but raised him as a son, I guess, until I think
I'm sure that kid didn't have any problems.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a totally normal childhood. but yeah, this is pure ethnic cleansing, genocidal president. Trail of Tears is in the long story of horrific things the American government did to Native Americans is one of the darkest chapters, and Jackson's probably the most responsible for it of any individual. But the one thing I said that he did do okay on was the Nullification Crisis. There were high tariffs passed, I think, under John Quincy Adams, because that's, the Whig agenda, the internal improvements. We're going to develop our own industry by protecting our industry with tariffs, so the North can build its own factories and everything. And the South always opposes this because they just want to buy cheap farming equipment, and they don't like paying these high import fees. So South Carolina, always the most rabidly reactionary state, asserts it has the right to nullify the tariffs. They call it the Tariff of Abominations.
Nice.
And John C. Calhoun, who is maybe my least favorite politician in American history, and that says a lot, but because he ends up being like the most ideologically pro-slavery, like the biggest leader in that before the Civil War. But Calhoun, as Jackson's VP, backs the idea that states can nullify federal law, which Jackson is really opposed to because he sees it as a step towards dissolving the Union. And eventually, like, Jackson talks tough. He's like, if anybody wants to, no, I'll hang people and shoot, his only understanding of how to solve issues.
Shoot people.
Personally going and shooting people.
Quietly, though, they pass a lowered tariff, so South Carolina kind of gets what it wants anyway, and the issue fades. Jackson does say something like, this is only a testing ground. Next time they want to do something like this, it will be related to slavery, which, Jackson doesn't have a problem with anyway. And then when Jackson dies, because of this falling out he had with Calhoun and because of Henry Clay, he says something like, my only regrets in life are that I did not hang John C. Calhoun or shoot Henry Clay. Like, he just wished he killed more people.
Wonderful last thoughts from Andrew Jackson.
Yeah. I wanted to read something historian Harry Braverman, the Marxist Trotskyist American historian, said about that Jackson was the rule of an exploiting class concealed behind the appeal to the common man. And he said that Jackson united the planter class, Western farmers, and the emerging proletariat against the bourgeoisie, which is a, I guess, simplified way to understand it. Jackson's coalition was small farmers in the West who were trying to be self-sufficient yeomen, rich slave-owning planters like himself, and the common landless whites, who all had various reasons for opposing the emergent, industrial capitalism in the North, finance capital. Fascinating guy. I don't know, you guys have anything to add?
I should learn more about this fucking
Yeah.
psycho.
Yeah, if anything, this podcast has really inspired me to do some next 6 months of reading. I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
It's probably the last one I can do.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one to end on too.
All right. We'll
Tap out there.
pick this one up another time. We got through the first 7.
I think those were some big 7.
The big 7.
The big 7.
Yeah.
That magnificent 7.